All right, so in this video, we're going to dive a little bit deeper into the CNS and the PNS, dealing with the brain and these cranial nerves. So looking back at neurons, there are actually 3 different classifications of neurons. Before we get into that, I want to go over those 3 different parts again. So we have this extension here, which we would call a dendrite. Dendrites receive signals. This circle would be the soma or cell body, which would process these signals. And then you have this extension called the axon. You know it's the axon because of these circles down here. Those are your axon terminals, okay? These terminals are actually responsible for relaying these synapses to the correct nerves. All right, so let's jump into the first classification of a neuron. We call it bipolar. So a bipolar neuron functions as a sensory neuron, but it's mostly just vision, okay? So we have on a bipolar neuron, very simple. You have your cell body, one extension, one dendrite extension, and one axon extension, okay? Very simple, sensory neuron. Pseudounipolar neuron is also a sensory neuron. It's mostly just the other senses, but also a lot of deep pressure touch, okay? So for the pseudounipolar, you notice it's a little bit different from the bipolar neuron. You see the cell body still, the soma, but instead of just clear extensions, it's kind of pinched, as if the cell body kind of moved over a little bit, and there's just this one long extension, okay? So this is actually just all one long axon extension. There aren't really any actual dendrites on a pseudounipolar neuron. However, one portion of the extension does go and pick up signals and act like a dendrite in the PNS. So we do kind of have a differentiation there. The other extension, end of that axon extension, does act as if it was a normal axon. It has those axon terminals and it does extend into the CNS, okay? Lastly, we have a multipolar neuron. Multipolar neurons are 99% of the neurons in your body. And that is because they have more functions than the other 2. Multipolar neurons function as either motor, which is acting on that sensory signal that we picked up already, or it can be an interneuron, okay? So multipolar neurons are either motor neurons or interneurons, and interneurons are processing neurons, okay? And we'll get into that a little bit more. But note how a multipolar neuron is structurally different. You still have that soma, and you still have that singular axon extension. However, dendrites, you have multiple dendrites extending off of the cell body. Whereas for bipolar, you have one single dendrite. Multipolar, a lot of dendrites extending off of that cell body, but one axon, okay? All right. So diving a little bit deeper into the neuroglial cells, those support cells of the neurons, let's go over some functions, okay? So we know the 6 neuroglial cells, we know the specific 4 in the CNS and the specific 2 in the PNS. Let's go over the functions of oligodendrocytes and Schwann cells, okay? Now, the function of both these cells is to create what's called the myelin sheath, okay? The myelin sheath, think of it as an insulator, a protector, okay? It covers axons, it protects them, and more importantly, it speeds up the transmission of these signals, okay? Okay, so oligodendrocytes in the CNS, you will have one oligodendrocyte creating a myelin sheath for multiple axons, okay? One oligodendrocyte, multiple axons. And also note that the axons that the oligodendrocyte is creating myelin sheaths for are axons of multipolar neurons, because multipolar neurons are the only neurons in the CNS. Schwann cells, on the other hand, it's the exact opposite. You have one axon and multiple Schwann cells on that one axon. In the CNS with oligodendrocytes, you have one oligodendrocyte per multiple axons. You have, in the CNS with the Schwann cells, you have one axon with multiple Schwann cells, creating that myelin sheath, okay? Also note, because we're in the PNS with Schwann cells, the Schwann cells are insulating the axon terminal, axon end of a pseudo-unipolar neuron, okay? All right. Now, let's also go over how information is transmitted throughout the PNS and the CNS, okay? So, I always use this scenario. You're going to be hit with a ball, all right? A ball is thrown at you, it hits you, ow, contact, oh my goodness, what do? Okay? Well, that contact of the ball hitting your skin, your arm, that is a sensory signal, all right? And because it's a deep pressure touch sensory signal, we're dealing with a pseudo-unipolar neuron, all right? So, in the PNS, our nerves, that's going to pick up that signal of pain by those dendrite, that dendrite extension of the axon, okay, and move into the CNS, gets processed in the soma, goes down to the axon terminals, and goes into the CNS, all right, to get processed so that we can figure out what to do now. The movement of sensory information from the PNS into the CNS is called afferent or afferent, okay? The direction of information moving from PNS to CNS is afferent or afferent. All right. Once we're in the CNS, the axon terminals of that pseudo-unipolar neuron are going to relay that synapses to the dendrites of a multipolar neuron, because a multipolar neuron is the only neuron in the CNS. That multipolar neuron is going to do interneuron functions, okay? It's going to process that. We're in the brain, we're in the spinal cord. We are processing what just happened, that pain, all right? So we have interneuron functions with a multipolar neuron. All right, now, the brain has had time. It knows what to do. It's going to act on it, all right? So, again, it gets processed, it moves down the axon to the axon terminals, and again, another multipolar neuron, dendrites, pick it up, gets processed, and then we move from the CNS into the PNS. We move from the brain to the spinal cord to specific nerves so that we can now act, so that we can do some motor functions. Motor functions are performed with multipolar neurons, okay? So we got hit, we had sensory, we got it processed, we know how to handle it now, and we are now going to act on it and throw that ball back, okay? Or cry, whichever. But we need multipolar neurons to process that, and we need multipolar neurons to act on it, okay? The information moving from the CNS to the PNS, we describe as efferent or efferent, okay? So afferent or afferent was moving from the PNS to the CNS. Efferent is the CNS to the PNS, okay? All right, lastly, we need to go over the difference between gray and white matter, all right? Now, gray matter is composed of cell bodies and dendrites, okay? So just this, just the dendroid, just the cell body. White matter is made of myelinated axons, all right? Gray matter appears gray because it doesn't have insulation. White matter is white because it does have insulation. It gets that insulation from those myelinated axons, all right? Now, in the brain, you'll have gray matter on the outside. That's that cerebral cortex we talked about in a previous video. And white matter on the inside, all right? On a spinal cord, gray matter is on the inside and white matter is on the outside. So it's opposite, all right?